The grand assembly hall stretched out like a cathedral built for giants, its crystalline walls reaching up into darkness that seemed to have no end. Daniel Cooper stood at the human podium, a small platform that the council had positioned at the very back of the chamber, far from the elevated seats where the 12 ancient species sat in their glory. He had stood here hundreds of times before, always ignored, always dismissed, always treated like a child trying to speak at a table of adults who had no time for his words. Today would be different, though nobody in this chamber knew it yet except for Daniel himself. He carried no documents, no proposals, no carefully worded suggestions that would be laughed at before he finished reading them. He carried only a single sheet of paper, and on that paper were 3 short paragraphs that would change everything. The council chamber hummed with conversation as various species discussed matters they considered important. The Krelian ambassador was arguing with the Selthar representative about mining rights in some distant asteroid field. The Yulani were complaining about trade route adjustments. None of them looked at Daniel. They never did unless they needed something. And even then they looked at him the way someone might look at a useful tool they had misplaced. Daniel cleared his throat and activated his podium's communication system. The sound echoed through the chamber, but the talking continued. He tried again, louder this time. A few heads turned his way, annoyed at the interruption. Councillor Vexthor, the Krelian who sat in the highest seat, finally waved his hand for silence. "The human wishes to speak," Vexthor said, his tone making it clear he considered this a waste of everyone's time. "Let us hear what proposal he brings today so we can return to important matters." Several council members chuckled. The Ascendant Collective's representative, Yendala, smiled in that way that looked friendly but held no warmth. Daniel had learned to read that smile over 2 centuries of human interaction with the council. It was the smile given to servants who spoke out of turn, but were too useful to punish harshly. Daniel looked down at his paper, then looked up at the assembled council. "I have no proposal today," he said, his voice steady and calm. "I come only to inform this council of a decision that has been made by the collective governments of humanity." That got their attention. Proposals were normal. Decisions were not. Decisions implied that humans thought they had the authority to act independently, and the council had spent 200 years making sure humans knew their place. Effective immediately. "Humanity is withdrawing from the Galactic Council," Daniel continued. "All human embassies will close within 6 standard months. All human citizens living in council space will be recalled. All treaties, agreements, and cooperative programs are hereby terminated. Humanity thanks the council for the opportunity to participate and wishes you well in your future endeavors." The silence that followed was complete. Daniel had expected confusion, anger, perhaps some attempt to argue or negotiate. Instead, he got absolute quiet as every being in the chamber tried to process what they had just heard. Then the laughter started. It began with Vexthor, a deep booming sound that echoed off the crystal walls. Others joined in quickly, the sound building until the entire chamber shook with it. "The humans are leaving," Vexthor said between laughs, wiping at his eyes. "Oh, this is wonderful." "They are upset that we did not approve their little safety regulations for cargo ships, so they are taking their toys and going home." Yendala's smile had grown wider. "Ambassador Cooper, surely you do not expect us to take this seriously. This is a negotiating tactic, yes? You hope to pressure us into giving humanity more favorable terms on something. It will not work. You need the council far more than the council needs you." Daniel said nothing. He simply placed his paper on the podium, turned, and walked toward the chamber exit. Behind him, the laughter continued, mixed now with jokes and comments about human pride and human foolishness. Only one voice did not join the mockery. Councillor Morith, eldest of the Silent Watchers, sat in his seat and watched Daniel leave with eyes that had seen civilizations rise and fall. He did not laugh. He did not smile. He simply watched, and in his ancient mind, something that felt very much like concern began to grow. Daniel walked through corridors he had walked 1,000 times before. Past walls decorated with the histories of species that counted their existence in millions of years. Past monuments to great council achievements, most of which humans had helped accomplish but received no credit for. Past doors that led to offices where human workers had spent decades doing jobs that council species considered beneath them. Lieutenant Kate Manning was waiting for him at the embassy entrance, her tablet in hand and her expression troubled. Sir, the communication channels are already flooding with messages. Every council species wants to know if this is real. The news networks are calling it a publicity stunt. Let them think what they want, Daniel said, walking past her into the embassy proper. Begin shutdown procedures. I want every human asset cataloged and prepared for transport. Every piece of technology we brought, every system we installed, every bit of knowledge we shared. If it came from human hands, it goes back to human space. Kate followed him, her fingers dancing across her tablet. Sir, some of these systems have been in place for decades. The quantum relay network alone covers 3 sectors. If we pull our technicians, those networks will fail within weeks. Not our problem anymore, Daniel said, and there was no satisfaction in his voice, only a deep tiredness. We spent 200 years trying to help, Kate. 200 years of being treated like servants who should be grateful for the chance to serve. I'm done. Humanity is done. The embassy hummed with activity as word spread among the human staff. Some looked relieved, others worried, but all of them moved with purpose. They had been preparing for this moment for longer than most of them knew. The human governments had seen the writing on the wall decades ago, had understood that the council would never treat them as equals, had slowly and carefully built up the infrastructure needed to stand alone. In his office, Daniel sat down and opened a secure channel to Earth. Director Richard Hayes appeared on the screen, his weathered face showing the strain of coordinating the largest withdrawal operation in human history. The announcement is made, Daniel said. They laughed. Richard nodded slowly. Did you expect anything else? They have never taken us seriously. The reports are coming in from all our embassies. The reaction is the same everywhere. Laughter, mockery, dismissal. And our people, already moving. The evacuation is proceeding on schedule. 6 months should be enough time to get everyone out safely. Daniel leaned back in his chair and looked out his office window at the council station beyond. Thousands of species lived here, working together in what they believed was the pinnacle of galactic civilization. They had no idea how much of their daily lives depended on human work, human maintenance, human problem-solving. They were about to find out. Richard, Daniel said quietly, do you think we are making a mistake? The director was quiet for a long moment. We are making the only choice we have left. Staying means accepting that humans will always be less than everyone else. Leaving means standing alone. Neither option is easy, but at least when we stand alone, we stand with dignity. Daniel ended the call and sat in the growing darkness of his office. Outside, the council station continued its daily rhythm, unaware that everything was about to change. In 6 months, every human would be gone. In 6 months, the council would begin to understand what they had lost. In 6 months, it would be too late to mend what 2 centuries of disrespect had broken. 3 months had passed since Daniel Cooper walked out of the Grand Assembly Hall, and the laughter had finally stopped. It stopped because the Orlan Trade Federation came before the council with reports that made even Vex Thor sit up and pay attention. The shipping lanes that connected the Orlan homeworlds to their colony systems were becoming dangerous again, more dangerous than they had been in 50 years. The Orlan representative, a thin creature named Pelvan, stood at his podium with charts and data that painted a grim picture. In the past 90 days, we have lost 47 cargo vessels to pirate attacks. 47. Before the human withdrawal, we lost perhaps 3 or 4 vessels per year, and those were usually recovered. The pirates are operating with complete freedom now, and our own security forces cannot cover the necessary space. Vexathor leaned forward in his seat, his earlier amusement completely gone. Where are the patrol ships that normally handle this? The council maintains security forces specifically for this purpose. Pelvan's response was quiet but clear enough for everyone to hear. The patrol ships were human, Counselor. We thought they were simply merchant vessels doing escort duty as a courtesy. It turns out they were the only thing standing between us and complete chaos in the shipping lanes. The chamber erupted into confused conversation. Yendala called for order, her voice sharp. That cannot be correct. The Council's own security bureau handles all major patrol operations. Humans were never assigned to security duties. They were not assigned, Pelvan agreed. They simply did it. For decades, human ships traveled the routes between our worlds, and whenever pirates appeared, the humans dealt with them. We never asked them to do this. We never paid them for it. They just did it, and we never even noticed until they stopped. Counselor Morith spoke for the first time in weeks, his ancient voice carrying weight that made everyone else fall silent. What else have we not noticed? The question hung in the air like poison. Nobody wanted to answer it, but the answer came anyway over the following days as reports flooded in from across council space. The communications network that connected 3 entire sectors was experiencing delays, sometimes hours long. Technical teams investigating the problem discovered that the quantum relay stations humans had built were far more complex than anyone realized. The documentation the humans left behind might as well have been written in an alien language for all the good it did. On Velcor Prime, a plague that should have been easily contained was spreading. The medical teams brought in to handle it could not synthesize the cure properly. They had the formula, they had the equipment, but they lacked something the human doctors called adaptive protocols. It was a technique that combined traditional medicine with real-time adjustments based on patient response. The Velcorians had never learned it themselves because human doctors were always available to handle these situations. The reports kept coming. Manufacturing facilities on 6 different worlds were operating at reduced capacity because the efficiency algorithms humans had implemented were failing, and nobody understood how they worked well enough to fix them. Food distribution networks were breaking down because the logistics software humans had designed required constant adjustment that only human operators knew how to do. Border monitoring stations were going dark one by one because the maintenance schedules humans had followed were more complicated than they appeared. Vexthor called for an emergency council session. The chamber that had been filled with laughter 3 months ago was now filled with worried faces and angry voices. The Krellian counselor stood at his elevated seat and looked down at his fellow council members with something approaching panic in his eyes. "This situation is unacceptable," he declared. "We are the Galactic Council, the pinnacle of civilization, and we are being crippled by the absence of one minor species. How did this happen? How did we become so dependent on humans without even realizing it?" Morth rose slowly, his old bones creaking. "We became dependent because we were arrogant. The humans came to us 200 years ago, young and eager to help. We let them help because we saw it as charity, as teaching primitive beings how to serve their betters. We never paid attention to what they were actually doing. We never valued their contributions because we never respected them enough to notice." Yendala shook her head. "This is not about respect. This is about practical matters. We need to bring the humans back, negotiate terms that will satisfy them and restore the systems they maintained. It is a simple problem with a simple solution." "Is it?" Moreth asked quietly. "What terms do you think will satisfy beings we have dismissed and belittled for 2 centuries? What can we offer them that they do not already have?" The question had no easy answer, but the council had to try. Over the next several days they drafted a proposal to send to Earth. It was full of diplomatic language about mutual cooperation and shared futures. It offered humans better representation in council decisions and more favorable trade terms. It was, by council standards, a generous offer. The response from Earth came within a week. Director Richard Hayes delivered it himself via holographic transmission, standing before the assembled council with an expression that gave nothing away. He listened to their proposal in silence, and when they finished speaking, he was quiet for a long moment before responding. "The council's offer has been reviewed by the human governments," Richard said. "We appreciate the consideration, but we must decline. Humanity has no interest in returning to our previous arrangement." Vexthor slammed his hand down on his seat's armrest. "You cannot be serious. Look at what is happening. Trade is collapsing. Security is failing. People are dying from plagues that should be easily stopped. You would let all of this continue out of wounded pride?" Richard's expression did not change. "Wounded pride? Counselor, let me tell you about wounded pride. For 200 years, humans worked to keep your civilization running. We maintained your networks, patrolled your space, solved your problems, and saved your people. And for 200 years, you treated us like servants. When we offered suggestions, you laughed. When we asked for recognition, you dismissed us. When we requested simple respect, you reminded us of our place." The hologram flickered slightly as Richard stepped forward. "You want to know why we are letting this continue? Because it is not our responsibility anymore. You made it very clear over 2 centuries that humanity's role was to serve, not to lead or even to participate as equals. We accepted that role because we were young and unsure of ourselves. We are not young anymore, and we are very sure of ourselves now." Yendala tried a different approach, her voice softening. Ambassador Hayes, we acknowledge that humanity was not always treated fairly. We are offering to change that. Better representation, better terms, a seat at the table where decisions are made. What more do you want? Nothing, Richard said simply. We want nothing from the Council because we no longer need anything from the Council. Our economy is growing faster than it ever did under Council regulations. Our people are happier than they have been in generations. Our culture is flourishing now that we are not constantly trying to fit into someone else's idea of civilization. You are offering us a chance to return to a cage. Even if it is a slightly larger cage with a nicer view, the answer is no. The transmission ended, leaving the Council in stunned silence. They had expected negotiation, compromise, the usual dance of diplomacy. Instead, they got a door closed firmly in their faces. Morith looked around at his fellow counselors and saw the reality beginning to sink in. The humans were not coming back. The problems would continue to grow, and the Council, which had ruled the galaxy for 50,000 years, had no idea how to fix what they had broken. We need to accept the truth, Morith said into the silence. Humanity carried us for 2 centuries and we never even noticed the weight they bore. Now they have set that weight down, and we are discovering that we cannot lift it ourselves. The question before us is not how to bring them back. The question is how we will survive without them. Nobody had an answer to that question. In the weeks that followed, the Council tried to implement their own solutions to the growing problems. Every attempt failed or fell short. The galaxy was changing, and the ancient powers that had ruled it for so long were learning a hard lesson about the difference between respect and fear, between cooperation and exploitation, between partnership and servitude. 6 months had passed since humanity announced their departure, and the situation had moved beyond crisis into something that looked more like collapse. The Galactic Council met in emergency session for the 4th time that month, and the mood in the Grand Assembly Hall was nothing like it had been half a year ago. Gone was the arrogance and certainty. In its place sat fear and desperation. Vexthor stood before the assembled council with news that nobody wanted to hear but everyone needed to know. The proud Krellian warrior looked diminished somehow, as though the weight of recent events had physically pressed him down. His voice when he spoke carried none of its former confidence. 3 frontier colonies have fallen to the Ravager swarms, he announced, and the chamber went silent. The settlements on Krell 7, Krell 9, and Krell 12 are gone. We estimate 15 million casualties. The Ravagers are advancing deeper into our territory, and our fleets cannot stop them. The Ravagers were a nightmare that every species in the galaxy feared. They were a hive-mind species from the dark space between galactic arms, creatures that consumed everything in their path and could not be reasoned with or negotiated with. For decades, the Ravagers had been kept at bay, their occasional incursions detected early and dealt with before they could establish a foothold. Now 3 entire colonies had fallen before the Krellians even knew they were under attack. Yandala leaned forward in her seat, her face showing confusion more than anything else. How did they get so deep into our space without warning? The early detection network should have given us weeks of advance notice. The early detection network was maintained by humans, Vexthor said flatly. They operated a system of deep space monitoring stations that we believed were simply communication relays. It turns out those stations were sophisticated surveillance platforms designed to track Ravager movements through dark space. The humans never told us what they were really doing because we never asked. We just assumed they were being helpful in their simple way. Morith closed his eyes as though the words caused him physical pain. How many other things were the humans doing that we never noticed? The answer to that question came from a report that Yandala herself had commissioned. She stood now with a data tablet in her hands, and her expression suggested she wished she had never ordered the investigation. I had my staff conduct a comprehensive analysis of human activities during their 2 centuries with the Council. The results are difficult to accept. She activated a holographic display that filled the center of the chamber. Data streams and charts appeared, showing connections and networks that spread across the entire galaxy. Humans were involved in nearly every aspect of Council operations. They served in administrative positions we considered too tedious for our own people. They maintained infrastructure we took for granted. They solved problems before we even knew the problems existed. The display shifted to show specific examples. When the Yulani trade negotiations were about to collapse 15 years ago, a human mediator named Paul Carter spent 3 months working behind the scenes to find common ground. We credited the success to our own diplomats. When the mining accident on Selther 4 trapped 2,000 workers, human rescue teams were the first to arrive and the last to leave. We barely mentioned them in the official reports. When the solar flares threatened to destroy the communication network in Sector 7, human engineers rebuilt the entire system in 2 weeks. We never even said thank you. The display continued showing example after example. Each one was a moment where humans had stepped up to solve a crisis, fix a problem, or prevent a disaster. Each one was a moment the council had either ignored or taken credit for themselves. The list went on for nearly an hour. When Yendala finally sat down, the chamber was completely silent. Councillor Pelvan of the Orlan Federation spoke quietly into that silence. We did not just underestimate them. We were blind to them. They were always there, always working, always helping, and we never saw them as anything more than useful servants. The economic reports were somehow even worse than the military ones. The Interstellar Banking Consortium presented data showing that trade volumes had dropped by 40% across council space. Small and medium-sized businesses were failing by the thousands. Entire supply chains had collapsed. The problem was not just that human merchant ships were gone. The problem was that humans had been the ones who made trade work for the smaller species and colonies that the major powers ignored. The council's own administrative systems were falling apart. Departments that had run smoothly for centuries were now buried in backlogs and inefficiencies. The human workers who had filed reports, analyzed data, coordinated logistics, and managed resources were gone. The council species who took their places discovered that the work was far harder and far more important than they had ever imagined. Vex Thor spoke again, and this time his voice carried something that sounded like despair. I had my military analysts review our defensive posture over the past 50 years. Their conclusion is that humanity was effectively our primary defense force. While we maintained large fleets for show and for internal politics, it was human ships that actually patrolled our borders, intercepted threats, and kept us safe. We have been living under human protection for half a century and never realized it. How is that possible? Demanded a counselor from the Zephyr Collective. Our fleets are massive. We have warships that can destroy planets. How could humans have been protecting us? Because they were doing the actual work while we were posing, Vex Thor said bitterly. Our great warships sit in orbital stations looking impressive. Human ships were out on the frontier dealing with pirates, raiders, smugglers, and early incursions from hostile species. They did not have the biggest ships or the most powerful weapons. They had speed, efficiency, and a willingness to actually do the job instead of just talking about it. Morith stood slowly, his ancient body moving with difficulty. We must send another delegation to Earth. We must make them understand how serious this situation has become. Billions of lives are at stake. Surely they will not turn their backs on so much suffering. The vote was unanimous. Every council member agreed that humanity must be convinced to return. The delegation was assembled quickly, with representatives from all 12 major species. They departed for Earth within days, carrying with them proposals, offers, and pleas. They believed that surely when humans saw how bad things had gotten, they would come back. They had to come back. The delegation arrived in the Sol system to find something they had not expected. The human home system was fortified beyond anything they knew humans possessed. Defense platforms surrounded every major planet and moon. Patrol fleets moved in coordinated patterns that spoke of serious military organization. Weapon systems of designs the Council had never seen tracked their approach from the moment they entered the system. The delegation was granted permission to land on Earth and travel to Geneva, where the human government had agreed to meet with them. As they traveled through human cities and settlements, they saw something else they had not expected. The humans looked happy. There was no sign of economic hardship or social collapse. If anything, humanity seemed to be thriving. The cities were clean and well-maintained. The people moved with purpose and confidence. This was not a civilization desperate for the Council's help. This was a civilization that had found its own way and was doing just fine. President Helen Carter received them in a conference room that was deliberately modest. No grand halls, no elaborate decorations, just a simple room with a large table. The message was clear even before anyone spoke. Humanity was not trying to impress the Council anymore. Morith led the delegation, and he opened with words he had prepared carefully. President Carter, We come before you to acknowledge our mistakes and to ask for humanity's help. The galaxy is in crisis, and we now understand that we cannot manage without you. What terms would humanity require to rejoin the Council? Helen Carter looked at the delegation with eyes that held no anger, but no warmth either. Let me show you something, she said, and activated a display screen. For the next 2 hours, she showed them a detailed record of every time humans had helped the Council, and every time the Council had dismissed them. She showed them proposals that could have prevented the current crisis, proposals that were rejected or ignored. She showed them incidents where human lives were lost serving Council interests, only to have those sacrifices forgotten or minimized. When the presentation ended, Helen asked them a simple question. Why would we return to that? The question hung in the air between them like a wall that could not be crossed. Morith looked at President Helen Carter and understood that she genuinely wanted an answer. This was not a negotiating tactic or a rhetorical flourish. She truly wanted to know why humanity should return to a situation that had caused them 2 centuries of pain and disrespect. Vexthor tried to answer first, falling back into the old patterns of thinking that had created this problem in the first place. Because you need us, he said, and immediately realized his mistake when he saw Helen's expression harden. What I mean is that humanity benefits from being part of the galactic community. You gain access to trade networks, advanced technologies, and protection from threats that you cannot face alone. Gregory Stone, who stood beside Helen as her Secretary of Defense, actually laughed at that. It was not a kind laugh. Protection? You mean like the protection you gave us when the Selthar raiders attacked our colony on New Boston 12 years ago? We called for help for 8 hours. Your nearest fleet was 6 hours away. They did not come. We defended ourselves with mining ships and civilian craft, and we lost 2,000 people. When it was over, the Council sent a message expressing sympathy and reminding us that Council forces could not be everywhere at once. Vexthor had no response to that. The incident was in the records, but like so many other things involving humans, it had been filed away and forgotten by everyone except the humans themselves. Helen pulled up another display. You mentioned trade networks. Let me show you something interesting. This is our current trade volume compared to when we were part of the Council. The graph showed a sharp increase after the human departure. We are now trading directly with independent species and minor civilizations that the Council ignored. They are eager to work with us because we treat them as partners, not as servants or inferiors. Our economy has grown more in 6 months of independence than it did in the previous 20 years under Council trade regulations. Yandala leaned forward, trying a gentler approach. President Carter, we understand that humanity has found success on its own. We are genuinely happy for you, but surely you can see that the current situation is causing tremendous suffering. People are dying from plagues that human doctors could cure. Colonies are being destroyed by ravagers that human monitoring systems would have detected. Millions of innocent civilians are suffering because of the pride and mistakes of their governments. Does that mean nothing to you? Helen's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, real emotion showed on her face. It means everything to us.
Do you think we enjoy watching people suffer?
Do you think we are happy that colonies are falling to the ravagers? Every day we receive requests for help from dozens of species across the galaxy. Every day we have to make hard choices about who we can help and who we cannot. Then help them, Yandala said. Come back to the Council. Resume your work. Save those lives. And be treated as servants again? Helen asked quietly. Return to a system where our contributions are ignored and our people are dismissed? You are asking us to sacrifice our dignity and our freedom to fix problems that you created through your own arrogance. Gregory pulled up a military briefing and displayed it for the delegation to see. Since you mentioned protection, let me show you what humanity actually had while we were part of the Council. These ships that you thought were merchant escorts were actually advanced military vessels operating under civilian designation. The monitoring stations you thought were simple communication relays were sophisticated weapons platforms. The relief workers you thought were humanitarian volunteers were trained special operations personnel. We maintained this deception for decades because we learned early on that if we showed our true strength, you would see us as a threat instead of as servants. The delegation stared at the display in shock. The human military was far larger and far more capable than any of them had imagined. Fleet compositions, weapon systems, defensive networks, all of it hidden in plain sight while the Council dismissed humanity as weak and dependent. You lied to us, Vexthor said. and there was anger in his voice now. "No," Helen corrected. "We simply stopped telling you things after you made it clear you were not interested in listening. You made assumptions based on your own prejudices, and we let you keep those assumptions because it was easier than constantly fighting for recognition we were never going to receive." Morith had been silent for a long time, watching and listening. Now he spoke with a voice that carried the weight of his many centuries of life. "President Carter, you are right. About all of it. The Council failed humanity in every way that matters. We took your help for granted, dismissed your contributions, and treated you as less than you were. We do not deserve your assistance, but I must ask you to look beyond what we deserve and consider what is needed." He stood slowly, his old body protesting the movement. "There are billions of beings in Council space who had nothing to do with how you were treated. Children who do not understand politics, families just trying to live their lives, workers and farmers and teachers who never sat in the Council chamber or voted on any policy. They are suffering now because of mistakes made by people like me, by governments and councils and committees that they had no control over. I am not asking you to forgive us or to return to the way things were. I am asking you to help them." Helen closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, they were bright with unshed tears. "Do you know how many times over the past 2 centuries humans asked the Council for help with something that mattered to us? How many times we were told that Council resources were needed elsewhere, that our problems were not important enough, that we should solve our own issues, and now you come here and ask us to set aside everything that happened because people are suffering?" "Yes," Morith said simply. "I know it is unfair. I know you have every right to refuse. But I am asking anyway because I have no other choice and because despite everything we have done to you, I believe that humanity is better than we are." The room was silent for a long moment. Helen looked at Gregory, who shook his head slightly. She looked at her Secretary of State, Linda Park, who stood nearby with her own troubled expression. Finally, Helen looked back at the delegation. "Here is what humanity will do," she said slowly. "We will not rejoin the Council. That door is closed and will not be reopened. However, we will offer assistance directly to individual species and civilizations that request it, not as subordinates of the Council, not under Council authority, but as independent partners working together as equals." Vexthor started to object, but Morith raised a hand to silence him. "What would these partnerships entail?" "Mutual respect," Helen said. "Recognition of humanity as equals, fair compensation for our services, and most importantly, the understanding that we can and will walk away again if we are mistreated. Any species that wants human help can have it, but only if they are willing to treat us with the dignity that should have been ours from the beginning." Yendala looked troubled. "The Council will never agree to humans operating independently within Council space. It would undermine our authority. Then the Council can maintain its authority while people die," Helen said flatly. "We are offering help on our terms or no help at all. Individual species can accept our offer or refuse it. That choice is theirs to make, not the Council's." The delegation returned to Council space with Helen's offer and presented it to the full assembly. The chamber erupted into argument. Some species wanted to accept immediately, desperate for any help they could get. Others refused on principle, unwilling to acknowledge humans as equals even now. The debate went on for days without resolution. Meanwhile, the crises continued to grow worse. The Ravagers advanced deeper into Krellian space. The plague spread. The economy continued its collapse, and humanity watched from a distance, ready to help but unwilling to beg for the chance to do so. 2 years had passed since humanity walked away from the Galactic Council, and the galaxy looked nothing like it had before. The Council still existed in name, still held sessions in the Grand Assembly Hall, still passed resolutions and made declarations. But everyone knew the truth. The ancient power structure that had ruled for 50,000 years was dying, and nothing could save it now. 4 species had formally withdrawn from the Council, following humanity's example. The Velcorians left first, tired of watching their people die from plagues while the Council debated whether accepting human help would damage their authority. The Orlan Trade Federation left next, their economy in ruins and their patience exhausted. 2 smaller species followed soon after, both of them quietly and without drama. They simply stopped sending representatives and stopped paying attention to Council proclamations. 3 other species remained in the Council, but reduced their participation to almost nothing. They attended sessions but voted against every major proposal. They paid their dues but contributed nothing else. They were there in body, but had abandoned the council in spirit. The message was clear to anyone willing to see it. The old order was finished. Humanity had formed something new in the void left by the council's collapse. They called it the Free Trade Alliance, and it operated on principles that the council had never understood. Mutual respect, shared benefits, and genuine partnership. 37 species had joined, most of them smaller civilizations that the council had always ignored or exploited. Together they were building something that worked better than the council ever had, precisely because it was built on cooperation rather than hierarchy. The Ravager swarms continued their advance through what used to be secure council space. The Krellian Empire had lost 12 colonies now, and their vaunted military fleet was in full retreat. Vexthor had been removed from his position as counselor after the loss of Krell 15, replaced by a younger Krellian named Zekmar, who had watched the disaster unfold and learned nothing from it. He still believed that Krellian pride and Krellian strength would be enough to turn the tide. It was not enough. The Ravagers pushed deeper into Krellian space, and the desperate calls for help that went out to the council were answered with sympathy and promises but no actual assistance. The council no longer had the resources or the organization to mount an effective defense. Finally, with the Ravagers only days away from the Krellian homeworld itself, Zekmar did something that must have cost him dearly. He sent a direct message to Earth asking for help. President Helen Carter, now in her second term, called her cabinet together to discuss the request. The debate was intense. Gregory Stone argued that helping the Krellians would only enable the council's continued dysfunction. Linda Park countered that allowing the Ravagers to take the Krellian homeworld would create a strategic threat to everyone, including humanity. The discussion went on for hours with valid points on both sides. Helen listened to all of it and then made her decision. We will help, but not because the Krellians deserve it and not because we owe the council anything. We will help because allowing the Ravagers to establish a major foothold in this region of space threatens everyone. And because there are millions of Krellian civilians who should not have to die for their government's pride. The message went back to Zekmar with humanity's terms. Human forces would assist in defending Krellian space, but they would operate under human command and answer to human authority. The Krellians would acknowledge humanity as equals in all official communications, and when the crisis was over, the Krellians would establish formal diplomatic relations with humanity as an independent power, not as a council species. Zekmar, with the Ravagers almost at his doorstep, agreed to everything. Captain Andrew Blake commanded the Earth defense ship Horizon, one of 50 human vessels that jumped into Krellian space to face the Ravagers. The Krellian forces that had been retreating for months watched in confusion as the human ships moved into formation. These were not the small escort vessels they remembered. These were warships, sleek and dangerous, carrying weapons the Krellians had never seen before. The Ravagers came in a swarm that blotted out the stars. Thousands of organic ships moving with the coordination of a single mind. The Krellian defense fleet had tried to fight them in traditional ways, meeting them head-on with massive firepower. It had not worked. The Ravagers simply absorbed losses and kept coming, overwhelming defensive positions through sheer numbers. Andrew Blake and his fellow captains used different tactics. Human ships were fast and maneuverable, where Krellian vessels were powerful but slow. They hit the Ravager swarm from multiple angles, disrupting their coordination and forcing them to split their attention. Human weapons were designed specifically to counter hive mind tactics, targeting the larger command organisms that directed the swarm and throwing entire sections into confusion. The battle lasted 3 days. When it ended, the Ravagers were in retreat and Krellian space was secure. The Krellian military commanders who witnessed the fight understood something that their politicians had refused to accept. Humanity was not weak. They had never been weak. They had simply chosen not to demonstrate their strength until the Council's arrogance forced their hand. Word of the Krellian defense spread quickly across the galaxy. Human military doctrine, developed during their years of independence, was superior to anything the Council species used. More importantly, humans fought to protect others rather than for conquest or glory. Species that accepted humanity's offer of partnership found themselves in genuine relationships, where their voices mattered and their needs were respected. The Council held an emergency session to address the situation. Morith, who had somehow maintained his position while others fell, presented a final proposal. He suggested dissolving the current council and forming a new organization with humanity as a founding member on completely equal terms. It was revolutionary. It meant abandoning 50,000 years of tradition and hierarchy. It meant admitting that the old ways were broken beyond repair. The debate that followed was bitter and angry. Some councilors supported the proposal, humbled by recent events and willing to change. Others rejected it absolutely, unable to accept that humans could be their equals no matter what the circumstances. The vote came down and the result was deadlock. Half the council voted for the proposal and half against. With no majority either way, the motion failed. Morhath stood slowly after the vote was announced. He looked around the chamber at the beings he had served with for so long and saw only stubbornness and fear. "Then we have chosen death over change," he said quietly. "May the universe be kind to whatever comes after us." 3 years after the departure, Daniel Cooper gave a lecture at New Oxford University on Earth. The former ambassador was old now, his hair white and his face lined with the years. A young student asked him if he felt vindicated by how events had unfolded. Daniel thought about the question for a long time before answering. "Vindication implies satisfaction," he finally said. "There is no satisfaction in watching civilizations fail, even civilizations that treated us poorly. I wish things had been different. I wish the council had learned to respect us before it was too late. I wish we could have built something together instead of walking away. But wishing does not change reality. And reality is that sometimes the only way to be heard is to stop speaking and let silence do the work." He paused and looked out at the students before him. "The galaxy is changing. The old powers are fading. New alliances are forming based on cooperation rather than domination. It is painful to watch the old order die, but perhaps something better will grow from what it leaves behind. That is my hope anyway, that all of this suffering and upheaval will lead to a galaxy where species treat each other with the respect that should have been there from the beginning." Far from Earth, the Earth Defense Ship Horizon patrolled the frontier between human space and the territory of species still loyal to the dying council. Captain Andrew Blake sat in his command chair reviewing reports when the communications officer called out that they had received a distress signal. A small Krellian colony was under attack by ravagers and they were calling for help. Blake checked his orders. The colony was in council space and humanity had no official obligation to defend it. The Krellian Empire had never formally accepted humanity's partnership terms, still clinging to pride even as their civilization crumbled. He could ignore the signal and continue his patrol. Nobody would blame him, but he thought about the 10,000 civilians on that colony who had nothing to do with their government's stubbornness. He thought about the children who would die if nobody helped. He thought about what it meant to be human and what kind of galaxy he wanted to live in. "Set course for the colony," he ordered. "Maximum speed." His first officer looked at him with concern.
Sir, we do not have authorization for this.
"The colony is outside our patrol zone." Blake smiled slightly. "Some things are more important than authorization. Those are people down there who need help, and we have the ability to help them. That is all the authorization I need."